Well, this year, government will have to rein in its spending while ensuring enough expenditure to help the most vulnerable in society. However, finding the perfect balance between prudent spending and taking care of the immediate needs of citizens, including poverty, seems to be a grave challenge. Well, I'm joined by former Statistician General Dr. Padile Hodla and the Director of Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute, Isabel Fryer. Good evening to both of you, and thank you so much for your time. Let me begin perhaps with asking you just to share your key takeaways from the Minister's address this afternoon. Dr. Lehotla, I'll begin with you.
Well, I think one didn't expect much because the indications were already very clear from the State of the Nation address that austerity are the measures that we will be having instead of loosening and growing the economy against austerity. I don't think I got indications as to how unemployment is going to be resolved and what numbers we will get. At the expected 3% growth over the next 10 years, unemployment will remain at 30%, poverty will remain at the same level of about 35% at the medium bound line, and inequality will remain. And these are the pandemics that we have had in South Africa over a long period of time. And perhaps then, therefore, the question that the president asked that things will be different. They will not be different, not in COVID and not in post-COVID, given what we are seeing in the budget, which is austere rather than loosening that austerity.
And I want to come back to some of the measures that perhaps the minister could have spoken about to loosen things up a bit. But Isabel, your own key takeaways from this budget?
Thanks, Kathy. I think that it was really important that the unemployment figures came out just yesterday, because what we need, for me, the missing point is what happens to working age people. You and I have spoken a number of times before about the initiative to address the needs of working age people who are unemployed through the social relief of distress. A number of people have been arguing that that really needs to be ramped up. At this SONA, the State of the Nation address, the president made mention to the fact that it was going to be extended for 3 months, but a number of people have been arguing that while it's important to extend the 350 rand, which is nowhere near the food poverty line of 585 rand, as it is currently articulated as a policy, it excludes millions of poor women. But if you just look at the statistics quickly, we have 15 million employed working age people. We have 24 million unemployed working age people. So what we saw today was an announcement that income tax, which is paid by working people, was going to be basically that the tax burden was going to be reduced. In addition to that, the tax burden on corporations, companies' tax was going to be reduced. What was going to be increased was a fuel levy tax, which is it's a flat rate tax. So basically, people who are not earning pay as much of that as people who are earning. So we look, for instance, at the grants that have been increased. We see that the child support grant has only been increased to 78% of the food poverty line, but we do not see a commitment to meeting the needs of the 24 million people who are not employed. And this is going to be a disaster for our economy as well. The Minister of Finance talks about some bounce back and regrowth, but if you do not have that basic demand on the ground, there is no chance that we're going to have the kind of sustained growth that is incrementally meant to grow so that we can get to, at some stage, pre-crisis levels. I was bitterly disappointed and actually quite alarmed by the budget as it was announced. There seemed to be a complete disregard for the majority of people who currently fall completely outside of the formal economy, which is what the Minister of Finance was speaking to.
Dr. Lehotla, let me bring you back in here because, you raised the issue of the fact that this budget effectively leaves South Africa where it was. A couple of years ago, when it came to the budget speech, any mention of austerity would have been welcomed because it seemed that government spending was just out of control. Why, in your view, is that not a good thing this time around and in this moment?
Well, austerity is not the way to go in a situation like this one. You cannot walk yourself out of growth, low growth through austerity. What you are going to do is to suck out the possible growth from the economy. And I mean, if you look at the projections that are being made, we are promised a 3% growth, at least in the next 10 years. There is a narrative that is very worrying, Ma'am Safan. These days, we hear a narrative that even if the growth is not that high, for as long as it is moderate and consistent, it's fine. There is another narrative that enjoins that, is that the growth of 3% is twice the growth of population. Never in the history of South Africa since 1994 have people spoken about population growth. It's a Malthusian drive to bring dimensions of population growth when the economy is actually failing. And we try to describe that for as long as the population, or rather the growth is 3% and is higher than population growth, things will be better. We grew at 5%, at 6% at one time. Things didn't get that better. So to lower the gaze and to lower the expectations of South Africans from 6% growth, that was demanded by RDP, by the NDP, even the maligned here was talking about 6%, because those who proclaimed that knew that 3% is not going to cut it. Now we are giving 3% over the next 10 years. Unemployment will remain basically where it is. Poverty will remain where it is, if not worse. And inequality the same. And then in addition to that, we have COVID-19. This is absolutely a disastrous situation. It's insensitive to the plight of the country and the future of this country.
Isabel, what needed to have been different for the minister to send a message, especially to those who you describe as being excluded out of South Africa's economy, to give them a signal that they're part of this country too, they can contribute to this economy, and in fact, room is being made for them to participate?
I think the message should have been that people would be given the tools to become part of the economy. So we were told about the budget that's been given to creation of jobs and the additional money through the presidential youth employment. It's not to say that sustained and targeted job creation schemes are unnecessary, but we're not seeing how people who are not going to be eligible to qualify for that kind of assistance are given the tools to participate. So if you look, for instance, at the cost of a 3-month extension of social relief of distress, that's 6.3 billion. We have argued that for 55 billion rand, you could have included both the women who are excluded from the social relief of distress, as well as the people who are currently receiving the social distress. So for 55 billion rand, you could have had 12 months of sustained social distress, which would have enabled people to stimulate that demand. I mean, the point is, if you're going to try and start up a business, a small business in the township, for instance, where people are not employed largely, you need people to be able to purchase what you are selling. We need that demand. Supply side interventions are not what's going to happen. It's not going to be the thing that takes us out. And so instead of cutting, we should have had that stimulus that enables people to operate and to build common centers where they accumulate the income that they can receive, and so they can have a greater purchasing power. I think one of the interesting things that I just want to note is that there was an increase to the projected 5 billion rand contingency fund or allocation to 12 billion. So that, I think, is an interesting space. That's additional 7 billion to look at, to see whether possibly that could be something that could be argued should be used in order to unlock the agency of people, of the people who are excluded. But right now, I mean, if you just look at the balance sheet, this conversation intermittently, I've never been less positive about the kinds of interventions. So we need to, instead of just coming back in 6 months' time, I think the civil society needs to be organizing. I think trade unions need to be looking to see kinds of socialization people can be doing, because we do not want people to feel that they've got nothing to lose. Because then you are at the sort of end of the social compact. We need to be saying, bring people in. These are the articulations. And we trust that Treasury will listen to that. I know a number of line departments have been very keen to have expansion programs, but they haven't been given the budget. And it's not to say that we're without sympathy to the fact that there needs to be a balancing act, but we're in a global pandemic. This is not a normal situation, and this budget of giving that stimulation or that framework for recovery that we were hoping to see.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there for tonight. Let me thank you both for your time. That was Isabel Fry. She's the Director of Studies in Poverty and Inequality, and former Statistician General Dr. Padi Lekgotla.